Welcome to the September 7th, 2010 meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have a roll call, please?
Authority members: Freeman.
Here.
Friedman. Here. Mincy.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Horazian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Quintero.
Here. And we have a report.
The agenda for the September 7, 2010 regular...
Welcome to the September 7th, 2010 meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency. Can we have a roll call, please?
Agency members: Freeman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver. Here. Chair Friedman.
Here. Can we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the September 7, 2010 regular meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, September 2nd, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. What's next?
Next is approval of minutes. There are no minutes, and following that is oral communications.
Do you have any cards?
No.
Okay, there are no cards. What is next, please?
On the business agenda at 6A is Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing regarding review of project objectives and update of financial impacts for the Americana brand. At 6A is a report only.
Okay. Mr. Lansafane.
Mr. Chair, members of the Redevelopment Agency, today we want to provide to you a report on the progress of the Americana brand. I think it's important to note in any analysis that this is not about financial return. We're going to give you some financial numbers, but the whole purpose behind redevelopment is not financial return. It certainly is one of the outcomes to a municipality, but it is generally set up. If the private sector could do it and make money, they would. And so redevelopment is a place where the private sector either can't or won't develop in blighted areas. So our main purpose is the elimination of blight. So having said that, as a preamble, we'll go through, we've pulled out three different areas for you to take a look at. The 33433 report, what we refer to is the costs to the agency. That was what was prepared in April of 2004. It was based on estimates from December of 2003. So a lot of the numbers that we use are going on 7 years old now. But with that in mind, there are three areas we want you to take a look at. Public policy that you as a redevelopment agency set out to achieve with the development of this project. The direct financial impact of revenues, and then finally we want to talk a little bit about indirect impacts and the appropriateness of looking at those as well. With respect to public policy, we've given you on Exhibit 1 some detail that was in our RFP and carried through all of our project reports. But generally, the agency was looking for a high-quality, comprehensive, and fully integrated commercial, retail, entertainment, and housing development that created a distinctive place, a southern anchor to Glendale's downtown, and would create a regional draw. We wanted to create a community gathering place, include a major open space element in our downtown, and then, most importantly, eliminate blight. And we included the generation of revenue. I think clearly we have achieved those public policy objectives by replacing the blight. We've diversified our retail and housing stock. We created open space. Approximately 2,500 construction jobs were created by this project, and ongoing there's about 1,500 people that are employed as part of the project. Last, we know from talking with the Caruso folks and using their loyalty program, rewards program, that they believe about 68% of their visitors are coming from outside of Glendale. So we are a regional draw. With respect to direct financial impact, we took the internal auditor's report and we broke it down into the same categories. Those were sales tax, property tax, park maintenance, and participation. With respect to sales tax, we projected $1.37 million to be generated. We Fell short of that in 2009, 1.165. The percentage that are in the staff report were off. There was a calculation error. That's about 15% lower than what we had projected. Again, these numbers were created in 2003. Nobody had any idea of the economic recession that was to hit in late 07, 08 into 09. Property tax, much different story. We had projected $1.44 million to be generated. In fact, the project in last fiscal year generated $3.65 million to the community. That's both the redevelopment agency and 20% of that to the housing authority. That's 152% gain beyond what we had projected. In terms of park maintenance, this was heavily criticized. Why are you looking at that? Nonetheless, it was in our report that there was some value received by the city of Glendale. We had projected that it would be $360,000. That was based on $120,000 per acre maintenance cost. In fact, when we looked at the most recent financial report that we get annually, we found that the Caruso team spent about $645,000 on that public open space maintenance. So that is, the higher the amount, the more benefit if you work with that measurement. Finally, on participation, the redevelopment agency staff conservatively estimated no participation would occur. In fact, in the first 2 years, that's the case. It is set up so that the developer achieves a preferred return, and once that preferred return is achieved, then we split profit 50-50. Those percentages have not been achieved in either of the first 2 years. With respect to indirect impacts, this was spin-off benefit. What happens when you create a project like this? For a number of reasons, we don't think it's appropriate for staff, certainly at this point in history, to go into too much of that. There's a number of reasons. The variables, as you move further and further away from the project, they become, well, I should say there are too many variables to really know what was the source. Second, any development that's going to spin off from this is going to be 3 to 5 years afterwards, and there's no way for us to adjust to the current economic situation, environment that we're experiencing today. So for those reasons, we did not put specific numbers to indirect benefit. So with that, this could be, if you desire to have on an annual basis, this is a template that we would use, compare against what we projected in 2004 with how the project is performing. With that, I have staff available for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the agency?
Comment.
Mr. Quintero?
Yeah, I have a question. In the future, how are we going to monitor the revenue participation? Are we going to be hiring an outside firm to look at their books? How exactly are we going to do this?
Every year we get a report with a certified audit, and then the Caruso company certifies that it's accurate, and then we examine that and we track those revenues. We do have the ability to ask for an audit, and we could have an independent auditor go in and verify all of that.
Well, you said we get a report. In other words, we hire a firm to do it, or is someone that keeps Caruso-affiliated holdings books? How does that work?
The Caruso team is required by our agreement to give us a report of their costs and operational revenues, which is it's based on a certified audit. And then they certify that that is accurate.
So if I can, so they have to retain an independent auditing firm to give us a certified audit.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Lansfane. Are there any comments from the agency? Mr. Weaver.
Just one. It's too bad the gadflies aren't here today. They continue to misunderstand why we approved the building of the Americana, that it wasn't to make money, it was for the community, goodwill, and all the things that have been stated in the report. So I think the majority of the people in this town understand why the Americana is there, and it is getting better and better all the time. They got all but 20 of the condos sold, and I think they're about 98% leased on the apartments. So that, in this economy, that sounds pretty good.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, thank you. What's next, please? Do we need a motion?
No.
Report.
Okay.
At 6B is Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing regarding branding San Fernando Road redevelopment project area as a creative corridor. At B1 is a motion implementing a branding strategy and other activities to promote the creative corridor concept.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lanseping.
Mr. Chair, members of the Redevelopment Agency, last year the agency was introduced to the concept of a creative corridor. Really, it's defining and identifying strategies to encourage a concentration of creative industry. And we use the word industry as opposed to fine arts or performing arts. That we would really like to encourage in our downtown area. The concept is consistent, we believe, with our 1992 redevelopment plan to encourage the economic transformation of underutilized and industrial properties. We believe that it brings a vibrant commercial uses with activities and to the area. They're clean. It complements, and even capitalizes on a concentration of large media companies that we have, the Walt Disney Company, DreamWorks, and other entertainment-related companies. It also brings a creative mind through those employees to the City of Glendale, which again we hope complements and helps support some of the other activities of the Redevelopment Agency in our downtown area, mostly related to the arts and culture that programs that we're trying to develop. The agency had directed staff to do some additional research on 5 areas. One, to determine, are we creating a district or are we branding a district? What is the current vacancy? What are the market rates? Could we get some feedback from property owners and then those targeted businesses? With respect to the first issue, branding versus creating, in inventory of the area, we found that there is a concentration of entertainment, of creative businesses, creative industry businesses. So it is not so much a creation of that, but rather a branding and then marketing to that cluster so that we have the opportunity and we're well positioned when vacancies come available to attract that type of business and, as we say, grow the brand. With respect to vacancies, we found that they are very low, 3 to 5% of those industrial zoned businesses. There's about 30 to 40 properties. We didn't find a pattern to any of those vacancies, whether it be size, size of area, price per square foot. And the other thing that we did find is property owners are very interested in subdividing and creating cooperative efforts among smaller businesses. We've touched base with one operator in the corridor, in the creative corridor in Glendale, that believes that this is viable. There are 3 other property owners that are desirous of subdividing and renting out to smaller businesses. Rents, we found, were very stable. Property owners are very encouraged and believe that their properties will still generate high rents. Our average rent, we found, was $1 a square foot, with a low end of being about 35 cents to a high end of $1.60. That puts us right in the middle of surrounding and competing communities. With respect to feedback from the real estate industry professionals and business, we held 3 task force meetings. We brought property owners and brokers together with creative business owners to get their input. And really, what we'd started out was giving them a list of incentives to ask, would any of these compel somebody to move into the corridor? And surprisingly, both the property owners and the real estate brokers said that incentives, financial incentives, weren't so much the determining factor for them. course, they would accept them. But that was not going to make or break a decision. From the real estate community, we found that we were very difficult to get started, to get in business, to actually be up and running. They had suggested that we look at entitlement incentives, those that would fast track, flexible zoning, administrative discretionary approvals, what's the word I'm looking for, expedited ministerial approvals. Also to create a single point of contact, much like we did with the auto dealers in South Brand, so that when an issue comes up, there's a single point of contact within the city that can deal with all the different departments. Then to look at the incentives on a case-by-case basis. Don't just package something and put it out there, but if somebody is really worthwhile, look at it on a case-by-case basis. From the Creative Business Group, we heard that they wanted to be affiliated with a trendy community, and they very nicely said that Glendale right now does not resonate as a hip, trendy community when just talking out in the business world. They want to be adjacent to complementary businesses. Large businesses like DreamWorks and the Walt Disney Company, as well as smaller businesses where we have a concentration of like businesses, there's the opportunity to do business to business. And then finally, they too said that financial incentives would not weigh their decision. A couple of things we heard from both groups was the issue of, quote, the building. We had a couple creative, what we call creative businesses that weren't able to land in Glendale because we didn't have the building for them. They were very particular in what they wanted, and our stock did not offer it. They suggested that a complex entitlement project was not where the creative mind wanted to go. And if it became too complicated, those types of business owners would just go look for something else where it was already made easy. And then finally, short and convenient commuting options, whether it be by bike or mass transit or even being able to walk. So we took all of this, and the next steps that we are recommending to you and asking for your approval on is to continue to work with our branding company, North Star, to create a marketing platform for the creative corridor. And not only to help brand the area as a creative corridor, but also to set up promotional materials that would attract creative business as vacancies become available. We'd like to complete our inventory so that we know exactly what we have out there. We've completed north of the 134, and we're working on the southern area. Second, we'd like to consider entitlement incentives for creative businesses. This would be some kind of fast-track entitlement with those things that I had mentioned before, whether they be administrative, discretionary approvals, some kind of incentive for plan check and to move it through quickly. We would put in place a single point of contact to help those businesses to relocate here. And then finally, to continue with our outreach and business assistance to identify areas where incentives might be appropriate, to work with business owners and property owners to bring them together in one of those subdivided cooperative situations and recruit as best we can creative business to the corridor. So again, staff is here that has worked on this project to answer any individual questions you have, and we're looking for your direction.
Thank you. Are there questions from the agency? Mr. Weaver.
Just one. People we're working with says in here no fiscal impact at this time. Will they be able to expand their scope to work down there initially without additional funding? I mean, it says you'll be coming back to us, so does that mean there's going to be a larger city investment?
We would probably come back to you on programs, no, we would come back to you on programs like expedited plan check, whether there were administrative, discretionary approvals. On a case-by-case basis, we'd be coming back for financial incentives if somebody...
About the branding.
The branding, we'll be working through that. Next week, we have for citywide, and then we would like to tier off that and start to brand this consistent with...
Okay, so when you get to the branding of it, you will probably be back asking for additional funding. Or are they going to do that? We already given them how much money?
Well, that is part of the scope of their work, the
Okay,
current scope of their
it's
work.
within the scope already. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Draymond, or, I think I saw a hand over here.
Go
Mr.
right
Ventura.
ahead. He's a...
All right, well, let me say I'm in total support of this concept. Last year, when I attended that Pacific Mayors Summit in Incheon, it was interesting. There were a couple of seminars that kind of focused on this idea of creative cities, and one guy in particular, a professor from France, Paris, I believe, who literally cataloged the creative cities throughout history and how they succeeded. And to me, this is a perfect first step to begin to figure out what it is we can do to attract those kind of companies, and more specifically to attract those kind of employees. And I don't think creative has to be synonymous with entertainment. It's not about that. It's about creativity in general, and the company that is on the cutting edge of whatever it is that they do, be it manufacturing, healthcare, entertainment, the creative arts in general. So I think this is a great first step. I think a lot of that infrastructure there in the privately held parcels there in the San Fernando Road corridor, I think they are going to be able to be readapted and used in different type of commercial usage. So it's exciting. I'm glad we're moving forward with it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Mr. Draymond?
a couple of questions. First of all, I support this project, the development of San Fernando as a creative corridor. And I want to thank the agency chair, Friedman, for shepherding this along from the very beginning of first raising the issue in a campaign setting as a candidate, and then following through on that as a council member, and now as agency chair. Especially when in the beginning the response you got was, you want to create a what? So I think we've come a long way. But I do have a few questions, and not related to my support of, but just things I'm unclear on. I don't know who to ask, so I guess Mr. Lansafame, you're the guy at the moment. Can you clarify what you were talking about when you were talking about subdivided cooperatives? What did you have in mind?
There is a I don't want to call it a movement, but there's a strategy that property owners have been doing. A 20,000 square foot building where they might create a small office space, almost a suite, where people like post-production or architectural firms or animators, independent animators, could come together, much like you see in the office suites where you rent a 500 square foot office and it comes with secretarial service, copying and whatnot. It's an area where you can rent a small space and co-opt some of those common services.
And
Okay.
if you don't mind my adding to that, one of the benefits of this being in a redevelopment area, and one of the helps that we can give these businesses that doesn't have a big financial impact, and it's something that they all expressed an interest in, was us helping in terms of putting those property owners together with those businesses who we're reaching out to as part of the agency, and helping them so that a property owner who may not have any connections in the creative world, through the agency, could be put in touch with them and then configure those buildings internally to suit those tenants.
Well, and then let me add, Amity did that at the Glendale Federal Building with Hollywood Production Center and now on Broadway. So we already have 2 prototypes here in Glendale in terms of entertainment.
I just want to clarify because I think one of the things we don't want to see is, for example, a property that becomes subdivided in a way and then rented in a way that, well, let me put it a different way. Something I don't want to see, anyway, within the creative corridor is a property that is already a building or a use that doesn't lend itself to these kinds of uses, that then subdivides itself and becomes 10 or 15 businesses that don't lend themselves to this concept. So, for example, when we hear some of the residents that live adjacent to this corridor saying, we'd like to see something that isn't, I don't know, pick a use, whatever it is that they believe is detrimental to their quality of life, right behind their property or immediately adjacent to it, suddenly become a property that houses 6 of those businesses rather than 1 of those businesses. So when we're talking about subdivided cooperatives, I assume that it is the idea of a use that is we're discussing for the purpose of bolstering the creative corridor, not bolstering one auto body place becoming 6 or one gravel yard becoming 10.
You are correct in that what we've drafted in the report is to help those businesses with creative industry.
Right.
For 6 auto.
And just to clarify, the incentives that they're proposing would only be for that targeted group of industries.
And that's exactly the answer I was looking for. Thank you. You guys do very well together. Have you ever thought of working together? Okay, Mr. Lansfame, my next question is, I don't remember through this branding process in any discussion whatsoever before the agency carving out a special niche, if you will, for this geographic area and saying that I was voting for North Star to pick that location to make it an add-on to our branding process. And so, A, I want to know, is that what we're talking about? And B, if we are, when did that happen?
Well, I think in the branding, we're looking at unique districts and business districts. Maybe I misspoke when I said in their scope, but in their scope, we're going to be asking them to help us with all of the neighborhood business districts, as well as this area, as well as our art and entertainment. Or how do we brand Glendale and then be able to tier off that to promote those areas?
But Mr. Lansfame, none of those are included here. The only thing that's included here is Creative Corridor. And so are we talking about for neighborhood business districts, our auto row and so on, a special brand for those areas, a development of separate marketing, appointing a liaison for those specific areas, and so on, because that's what we're talking about here. I'm not saying I oppose them. I just want to know what was the process that we have a separate agendized item for that area where we're talking about adding all of these things. And in fact, it's kind of the question within all of this, with the direction you're asking, is should we be asking for, in essence, special niches within city branding for a variety of types of projects, a variety of types that go on in a variety of types of geographic areas in our city. And if so, why aren't we seeing those as well, as separate agendized items? I don't mind that, and I'm prepared to support it. I want to know how we got here, because this never came to us as a discussion. And you're saying it's included in the scope. When Mr. Weaver was asking about the cost, you're saying this was already an anticipated aspect of it. But this is very specific. What you're asking is very specific in this. And this isn't under the general heading of, yes, we're going to promote our neighborhood business districts, and yes, we're going to promote our Brand Boulevard of cars, and yes, we're going to promote our downtown retail area, and yes, we're going to promote the fact that Glendale has, well-established traditional single-family neighborhoods and so on, and historic districts and so on. So how did that get into this report, that it's a separate agendized item that's part of the scope?
Well, let me see if I can explain this way. That when we engaged North Star, we wanted to create a brand for the city, and then use that brand for individual areas. Staff put those two together because what we're finding is in the creative corridor, we want to, maybe branding is not the right word, but we want to market the fact that this is a creative corridor and there are creative businesses. We have work to do in that marketing and promotional development that will come at some point in the future. But that was what was laid out in the North Star arrangement.
Maybe where you're confusing us is using the word branding.
Well, I can tell you point blank, I never voted for anything that engaged North Star in eventually what became a contract to promote the city of Glendale and its various areas as attractive venues, and to carve one specific project out as a separate add-on, if you will. And I don't mean add-on in terms of cost, I just mean as a separate ornament on the Christmas tree of Glendale, if you will, and to the point where we're appointing liaisons and developing separate marketing and so on. As I said, I plan to support this because I think it is of benefit to the city and worthwhile, and really, as Mr. Quintero was saying, it's a good direction for us for a variety of reasons. But I'm very concerned again about how we got here, because I saw the same presentation that I assume all my colleagues saw in different briefings by North Star, and I asked the same question there. And to be very, I don't want to offend anybody, but the answer I got was hemina, 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 hemina. I didn't get an answer. And you were there, Mr. Lansfame. You heard me ask this same question. And I told you at that meeting that I would ask the same question here if it was presented the same way.
I'm looking for direction then from the agency how you would like us to handle that portion. If you want us to come back, we will with a separate program for it.
Well, it's confusing to say it's part of the branding package we already saw, which really didn't carve this out. That's why I started asking the question about the funding. Is this going to be a new add-on? Now you're saying it's not really branding, it's marketing. So, well, I don't know what you're saying.
If I might, when we brought North Star into this, the idea was that they were going to come up with a concept to help brand the entire city. Yeah. And this, like our downtown, like Montrose, like anything else, is a part of the city that will be some part of their branding project. We don't really know what the branding project is yet because they've done their vision study, but they haven't given us any proposals yet about what their marketing campaign is going to look like. So I think, we really don't know what shape that will take. I think where it's getting a little confusing is that when we embarked on this project, on the San Fernando Creative Corridor project, what we heard from a lot of the businesses that we had reached out to and the property owners was that they felt that a lot of what was lacking for the corridor was a lack of awareness within those creative industries. And so that a lot of the job that we had to do wasn't so much, the good news is that they didn't say, boy, what we really need is the agency to give us a lot of money to try to pay businesses to come here. They weren't interested in that. They felt that we had something great already, but that for somehow it hasn't translated into the rest of those creative industries, that a lot of them that we had reached out to who were in, let's say, entertainment, didn't even know that Disney had the kind of presence that they have in the corridor. So it became a realization that what we needed to do was marketing. And since we have North Star here, to embark on any kind of marketing for the creative corridor without somehow engaging North Star to be sure that there's coordination between the different branding efforts doesn't make sense. The reason we're here today and we're talking about the corridor and not all of those other areas is because that's what the agendized item is, and this is the redevelopment agency. We don't, that's what we're here to talk about. So I think it's a very fair question and fair concern, but you can't embark on different marketing tracks for the creative corridor and for the entire city of Glendale without a coordination between them. Somehow North Star, if they're going to be our sort of marketing directors, have to have some kind of input and control into the branding of this area as well as the city.
But it's coming across as being very specific to the corridor. So,
Well, that's because, if I may, that's because it is. I'd like to respond also.
Go ahead. I'm not against it.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is, I agree with everything you just said, but you could take that exactly and apply it to Brand Boulevard of Cars. You could take every one of the things you said and apply it to Mid-Brand. But those weren't specifically called out, if you will, in the presentation from North Star, nor in this particular item that's before us. And you could say use the exact same words. In other words, you can't say that the branding for the city as a whole would be identical to, or marketing rather, as a whole for Brand Boulevard of Cars. Wouldn't be the same as branding for the city as a whole. So are we planning to have an agendized item for that? That, calls out all of these separate items for that particular area. And again, I come back to my question, which I really don't think was answered. Maybe I'll get it answered another time. But that is, how did we get to this item? This was not something that was on the plate when we were last speaking. Well, we created this contract, if you will, with North Star.
And I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question, or I've not done a very good job of explaining.
It's probably the latter, except that I'm just not understanding you. It's probably not your fault, Mr. Lance.
Yes, to answer your last question, we will have to come back to you for actual marketing materials for all of these areas.
This isn't about marketing materials. This is an agenda item that calls out one specific niche within our city and says, we're going to add this, 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 and this, and we're going to ask North Star to work on this and brand it and do this. I'm not seeing anything for Brand Boulevard of Cars. I'm not seeing anything for a downtown retail area specifically. I'm not seeing anything for Mid-Brand or all of these other different areas or venues in the city that North Star, in their briefings with us, has said they are going to tackle. You describe them as marketing materials or brochures or those sort of things. This is not about a brochure. This is about a whole separate add-on strategy for a geographic area of the city. And I agree that it's worthwhile, and as I said, I'm going to fully support it. I want to understand where we're going from here, because this was not the direction that council voted on when we went to North Star. We didn't say brand the city, and as a separate aspect of that, also brand this. Market
Mr.
this.
Starbird?
Yeah, let me try, because I'm sort of at the same spot on this as you are. A lot of questions. I also sat to the meetings with North Star. My sense is that's going to give us a very general branding message theme, which a number of different areas could then utilize and draw on, but it is not specific to Brand Boulevard of Cars or Spar Heights or any of the individual business districts. To that extent, it seemed to me that if our next step is going to include having North Star look at something specific for the creative corridor, I may be too soon to say whether there will be additional costs associated with that or not. I mean, maybe Phil knows something more than I do. My guess is if it's outside of that general kind of branding North Star is working on, then this next step could very well include some additional costs in which we need to come back to you on. I don't know that we know that what that would be or what that might cost. So there very well could be if we took this additional step to do this.
Just to clarify something, when we've been talking in the task force meetings about the subject of promoting the corridor and, the quote-unquote branding, it's been less about the North Star type branding of here's a slogan, here's an image, here's how you incorporate it into the way that you present the city. And it was been more about finding ways to reach out to those industries individually and let them know about the corridor, more of the traditional type of outreach that redevelopment does, where whether it's running an ad in the trades, whether it's reaching out to individual businesses. So let's not confuse, when we're talking about the marketing and branding of the corridor, a portion of that needs to be under the North Star umbrella because we can't be at odds with whatever they're coming up with the city. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be out there doing some huge... Most of the marketing and outreach that I'm anticipating, once we sort of have our identity of what the corridor is, with North Star's help, will be done by our redevelopment agency, by our redevelopment department. It's Phil and his staff that will be doing that outreach, not North Star. So I just want to be sure that we're not getting that confused. When we're talking here about promoting the corridor, about outreach and marketing, even though North Star, I think, will help us with our identity the way they will with what they're doing throughout the city, the legwork is not going to be done by them. It's going to be done by our own employees. So maybe that's where some of this confusion is coming in. Yeah, Mr. Weaver?
Well, let's face it, I've had a number of people ask me, and I even read it in the paper, why are you spending all this money on branding? Branding, I guess, to give us a name and identity like other cities. So we've invested, what, $200,000 or whatever so far. I'm just wondering if it's the tip of the iceberg, that there'll be more and more put into this to create a brand name. Marketing, the different sections like marketing, the Brand Boulevard or cars, marketing San Fernando Road is great, but I don't think we're at that point in this scenario. North Star is supposed to be coming up with a branding name for the city if that's at all possible. That's going to skyrocket us and have people pouring into this already crowded city of Glendale. That's what I saw the branding to be. Not to do all the work, as you said. The staff will do a lot of marketing, but we've talked to staff over the years about marketing everything in Glendale. I mean, all the business district. I sat here 14 years, and I've continued to hear it. We got to market. We got to market. And that's what we have a staff for. So, I don't know. I just hope it's not a tip of the iceberg at this point. I thought the branding was a general thing, one name for the entire city that kind of symbolizes how we're unique compared to the other cities. And I don't know. I mean, there's a good idea, I'll support it, but I just don't know where it's going.
Mr. Najarian.
A couple questions. I hadn't thought about the comments that Mr. Draymond made, but it seems to me that if we're working so hard at creating a brand identity for the city, it would be counterproductive to peel off other areas in a branding effort. You can't have two brand efforts out there. But what I think is, and I support the usage of the creative industries along that corridor, but you know what I think we're losing sight of reality. I mean, we're talking theory here, and I have an example that I want to bring forth. There's a television production studio on San Fernando Road, ARTN, and they are broadcast worldwide. What they intended on doing was expanding next door to create a studio audience studio, if you will. This poor guy has been at it for close to 2 years. He has been paying rent on the next door property as he works his way through the myriad of permits and applications and requirements. And I understand now, I get updates occasionally, that now they're going to have to do a CEQA analysis on the 60 parking spots that he's renting from the warehouse down the street. We're fiddling here while Rome is burning. This guy is bringing in the exact type of use that we want for the city. And we are, as we argue about, is it a brand, is it a subcategory, here is an employer, here is someone that's bringing that type of creative use that is going to have the spin-off uses such as, the editing, the film usage, catering, lighting, and, I don't know the industry that well, but there's all those myriad of uses. And he's told me he's ready to give up. He says, I just can't afford to pay. Imagine paying rent on a studio. It's got to be at least 10,000 square feet for 2 years while this is working its way through the process. He's ready to give up. So what I think that is more important than a branding effort is a liaison. We used to have someone like Dave Ahern, who was a liaison to the Brand Boulevard car people, to shepherd these projects through. So when a colleague of this guy asks him, oh, well, how did it go? He says, oh, it's great. Glendale's helping me out incredibly. Come on down. It's a no-hassle process. I think that's much more important. If we have to put staff time, if we have to put money, it's much more important to have someone ready to make these projects a reality rather than just give, lip service to a branding effort. Branding is good, but we've got to bring these people here who are ready, willing, and able to invest their hard-earned money in the corridor and to turn this into what we're talking about, the creative corridor. But I have two other comments. Is it to the extent that we would like to do a rezoning and have I know we just did the San Fernando zoning about 6-7 years ago. Do we want to turn it into something like a South Brand Boulevard specific plan where we are going to restrict the types of uses that can be brought in to a greater extent than are already redefined and rezoned plans indicate? Again, this is where we're putting our money where our mouth is. If we're saying we want it to be creative uses, well, let's eliminate the uses of the body shops. Let's eliminate the ball bearing factories. Let's eliminate the paint mixing companies, the plating, and all these other things, and focus on these uses that we are going to encourage and promote through the means of a specific plan for zoning. These are, to me, I think these are as important, if not more important, than a public relations campaign to just let people know that we're out there. If we bring people in and they see, oh my God, it's going to take me a year and a half to get my business located here, they're going to say, forget it. It was a great idea, great pitch, but I'm a businessman. I've got to make money, and I have no time to sit here and go through the entitlement process for an extended period of time. So that's what I think that's a very important aspect to this idea.
If I may, I completely agree. And having sat through the task force meetings, it's exactly what you were just talking about, Mr. Najarian, that came through loud and clear from the property owners and from the businesses, that what they wanted to see more than anything was what staff has here as the next step, number 2, to develop a program to fast-track entitlements for creative businesses so that they don't get mired in this endless bureaucratic process, which is so frustrating to a lot of businesses, but particularly creative businesses we found have a very short attention span and a very short fuse, but mostly they have time constraints. These are a lot of businesses that are project by project, film by film, and they need to be up and running. So that's absolutely a much bigger and more immediate part to this than the branding idea. And I think one of the reasons we're struggling with this whole branding concept is because we don't know what it is yet. That's something that's kind of going to be down the road. But for now, we can really start putting those that streamlined entitlement process into place. And that's what I hope we get out of today. And then, as you suggested, the second bullet point was designate a single point liaison within the city to shepherd creative industries through entitlement. And it's those two strategies that we've been told from the creative businesses and the property owners that they think, and this is something that costs us, it's nothing really. I mean, it's a little bit of staff time, but it's that hand-holding and that help that we really expect to give us our biggest bang for our bucks and get those properties rented. So I agree, and I hope we don't get caught into a quagmire about theoretical marketing in the future that we don't even know kind of what the shape of that is going to be at this point. We know it'll somehow involve North Star because we're not going to pull this out of the city. I mean, this has to be coordinated in some way. But the most immediate thing right now is to make it an easier place to do business. Now, in terms of the zoning, I personally don't, it's another conversation, I think, for a different day. I don't think we need to try to push any business out. I think that some businesses are just kind of going by the wayside. Some of the manufacturing is leaving, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But the idea here is the backstopping. How do we encourage the businesses to come in as others leave, to bring in the types of businesses that we want with high-paying jobs, steady businesses, and all of that. So it's not about trying to get rid of businesses, I think, but it is about gently guiding this corridor towards the type of future that we hope that it has and the types of uses that we'd like to see. Bringing planning in on this, as well as redevelopment, will help give the oversight that Mr. Draymond was concerned about, that I think we all are. Businesses that aren't the greatest uses near residential, they'll be able to help make sure that doesn't happen, because we'll have a closer glimpse of what's happening. We'll have more day-to-day contact with these businesses because we will have a liaison. So that's my hope. But I agree that we need to move forward with this because we talk about wanting to help businesses, and this is a way we can help business right here and now. We can help the property owners, and we can help the businesses. And we have people out there, like you said, who are struggling with projects because they get stuck in processes that don't allow for administrative discretion to waive some of these requirements. And that's what we're talking about, trusting redevelopment and planning to be able to make those kinds of decisions to say, this is a good use, it's not going to be negative, and let's just move it forward and get these people moved in. Mr. Weaver.
Well, I hate to think about going back and looking at rezoning again. We spent an awful long time getting to the zoning that we're at now, which I think is sufficient as far as trying to help people get through the bureaucratic maze of Glendale. We've all heard over the years how terrible it is to deal with the city of Glendale. Nothing new there. That's an internal process, and I think a discussion for another day if you want to talk how to cut through the red tape. Keep hearing, oh, it's so much easier in Pasadena. Oh, it's so much easier in Los Angeles. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. But if I know staff has looked at that over the years, and if it's still a nightmare, well, then that's, like I said, a discussion for another day why it's still a nightmare. I've advocated some ways to do it, and I give them my 2 cents worth. It's still the same problem. Well, what can I say? I mean, that's a staff problem. That's not ours. All we can do is say we don't like what we see happening out there. Staff go back and look again how we can become more business friendly and move things through the process quicker. If there are laws and there's codes and meetings you have to go through, planning and design review and everything, you're locked in with time frames. Environmental documents, you're locked in. That's state. We can't control everything under the sun. And we have limited staff. So where do you draw the line? Where do you simplify and make things much better for the consumer? I don't know.
Mr. Draymond.
It's a very interesting discussion. And I think that through this also, the public gets an opportunity to get a clearer idea of what the creative corridor is. When we had our briefing, we saw essentially what the report that will be coming. When is it coming? Next.
When are we hearing the North Star report? Is that next week? Next week.
Next week. The comment I made, one of the comments I made, I thought very good, but one of the comments I made was that part and parcel of, every fourth paragraph in it was about the creative corridor. And that made sense to me and I asked the question then. And when Mr. Lansafame came here, he was talking about how it's kind of part and parcel of it, and it's included in the scope. At the same time, we're saying we don't know what this branding is yet. Our next step is to include the creative corridor in the Glendale branding strategy being developed by North Star and develop outreach materials and programs for attraction to desired uses. So is it separate? Is it one and the same? It certainly is heavily included in the presentation that's going to be coming here. So to say it's some separate effort that staff is doing doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like the presentation I saw, anyway. So, and again, I come back to my same question. I want to know what this process is that occurred that has taken this one area with a project that I admittedly support completely, but I want to know how that got moved in part and parcel of the presentation, at least that I saw. I saw it with Mayor Najarian. Good presentation, but it was sewn right into it. And so some decision had to have been made at some point. We're saying we don't even know what the brand is yet, but our next step, even though we don't know what the brand is, but our next step is to move forward with this, through North Star. And you're saying it's part of the scope, but we're hearing up here, well, really, it's not. So I'm a little puzzled.
I think I'm glad that you explained it more, because I wasn't really understanding what you were asking. I think I understand it better now. And it's very interesting because I saw the same presentation that you saw, but we saw it separately because we have Brown Act, so we can't all be in the same room together. And I asked a similar question. I said to them, there's a lot of creative corridor mentioned in here, and why is that? And the answer that I was given was that it came from the participants in their visioning, that the people who they reached out to when they were asking them questions were bringing it up. I didn't realize, I don't know whether it was prompted by them or if this is something that was just on the minds of some of the people that they reached out to. I don't know who those people were in any case, but that's the answer that I was given when I met with them.
Well,
so I understand your confusion. I
answer.
think that we need maybe a separate, I don't think it's really so much a part of this as it is that next week when we're talking about the North Star effort, we can maybe get more clarity from them. But from my perspective, I can tell you that I don't think that this agency, either individually or, I know we didn't as a group, and I know that I don't think it happened individually, that anybody sort of on the sly said, hey, let's make sure that North Star concentrates on this particular project. That's not what happened. So I don't know whether they felt that they knew about this project and wanted to include it, or I don't know whether it came from the participants that they were interviewing. I really don't know, but it would be it's a good question to ask them next week.
Well, and the answer I got was completely different when I asked that question from the one you received. It wasn't that the different stakeholders that were talked to in the survey kept coming up with it. It was, oh, no, we didn't mean to make that a separate one. It's that we plan to do this with all of these different entities, all of these different venues within the city. We're just sort of mentioning that one. And I asked that question specifically of Terry, the one making the presentation from North Star. The
girl from Tennessee.
The girl from Tennessee, yes. And that was the answer I got for that exact same question. And let me just boil it down to this, and then I will not say any more on the subject. What we're talking about, and what Agency Chair Friedman has been working on with Creative Corridor, I believe is very forward-looking, and it is beneficial to this city in ways that that I think even us sitting up here can't even imagine right now for the future of this city. But at the same time, I just want to make sure that we're also looking at industries in this city that for many years have been an essential part of the economy of this city, the revenue of this city. And I keep mentioning Brand Boulevard of cars. So I'm happy to invest time, energy, and money if necessary to move this along, but we seem to see nothing other than this in the presentation from North Star. We see a branding, concept, variety of branding concepts, and then we see a bunch of conversation about creative corridor. And I don't want to be accused later of taking what has been a golden goose in our city, like downtown retail, like Brand Boulevard of cars, very essential elements of this city's revenue. And that's just not found here. We don't have a separate agenda item coming up to ask us to appoint a liaison to work with them. We don't have a separate agenda item that I know of coming up to ask for that we get rolling immediately with North Star to get brochures and feelers out into the community at large beyond Glendale. You see what I'm saying, Mr. Lanzafame? This is one niche in the city that's been singled out and laid out here with a separate agenda item asking for very specific things. It's not just, someday we'll get to that. It's specific things, a liaison, outreach materials, programs for, expedited this and expedited that. That's fabulous. But I also want to have an answer when my constituents, both business and residential, come to me and say, hey, where's the work you're doing on Glendale Galleria? Where's the work you're doing for Brand Boulevard of Cars, or Kenneth Village, or Adams Square, or Spar Heights, or the Foothill Corridor? Where's the expedited everything for them? How come those aren't separate agenda items? They all need to be a part of the branding operation for the city. They're all struggling. So I would like to see those very agendized items with the very exact same concepts. Maybe Mr. Najarian is correct. Maybe we need an overall liaison, not just one for the corridor, but either separate ones or one liaison who is going to work with North Star and work with these areas. Anyway, I will be supporting this, however.
I think Mr. Draymond makes great points, and certainly doing this and helping business in one area doesn't mean that it won't help business in another area, or that if it's a model that works, that maybe it's something that we do bring citywide. But given that it's a redevelopment area, and this is the redevelopment agency, we only have 2 areas that this agency can come up with, changes in process. And I do hope that we treat those areas like incubators for maybe different ways of the city processing permits or doing business, and if it does work, we can bring it elsewhere. I was, as Mr. Draymond was speaking, I was thinking back to when we did have our North Star presentations, and I remember them calling out the creative corridor a few times, but I do remember them also bringing up many other areas in Glendale and many other industries. So I don't want people to think that it was kind of all creative corridor, but they can judge for themselves because we're going to be seeing the same presentation next week. Mr. Weaver, did you have a hand up?
Yeah. I just hope the businesses that are down in that sector, industrial and the commercial businesses, aren't getting the impression we're trying to drive them out. We rezoned very specifically with a long-range goal of what that corridor would turn into. And it might take 30 to 50 years to realize that certain industries, as technology evolves, they will naturally just fall out of business. Something better will come along and do what they're doing now. So I don't want them to think that, because I'm sure that's not our intent. Another thing on the motion, it says, direct staff to launch a pilot creative corridor branding effort and assistance program. And I really don't know the meaning of telling you to create a pilot branding program and assistance. I don't know what we're getting into. The wording kind of bothers me, but if my colleagues think they're okay with it.
Well, Mr. Weaver,
I'll
I think
vote for
that if I'm not mistaken, and please shake your head or wave if I am, that it's the next steps on the left side of the page,
Reading the motion.
1, 2, and 3 that the motion's referring to. Is that correct? So that the elaboration of what that means?
I see the
It's in
next
the record
steps, but I'm just reading the motion.
Madam Chair, I noted the same thing as I read the motion, listening to the conversation that Mr. Weaver has, which it seems to say launch, including the marketing program. So I've done some rewriting to try and pull back away from this issue of branding and to emphasize the assistance component.
Okay.
Let me just read this if I can. Moved by agency member blank, second by agency member, that the agency hereby supports the concept of a creative corridor in the San Fernando Road area and hereby directs staff to, and then I take out the launch and the pilot creative program, hereby directs staff to initiate assistance programs to further support opportunities to develop the creative corridor in the San Fernando Road redevelopment project area as described in this staff report, and to subsequently report to the agency board on the specifics of those assistance programs, and to bring back for discussion with the agency board efforts to market the creative corridor after North Star completes its work on community branding. So that essentially you'd have the whole branding concept to talk about yet after North Star is all done, and we would, however, begin to put the details together to bring back to you specific assistance programs like the liaison, whether it's through zoning or specific plan or goals that we'd have in the corridor area, to begin to work on those and bring them back to you.
Okay. Mr. Draymond.
I would absolutely support that, and one of the things that I was trying to get at is that I anticipate, after we do hear a presentation from North Star, and particularly next week, just after we've done this, that one of the things we would hear from business constituents in the city is, hey, I've been here. There was no agendized item for me to initiate a program of support for me, yet something new and conceptual, no matter how great, gets that. And it seems like an emphasis that I should have if I'm an existing business that have been, or industry within the city that's been contributing heavily to the economy of this city for years and years. So I think that does clarify it. I agree. I don't know, but I think that does clarify it. To include this in a branding program, or give the impression that we're including this in a branding program that doesn't exist yet, that we haven't seen the public hasn't seen the promotion or the presentation of yet, and that we say we don't know what that branding is yet, feels funny to me. And I think this...
Well, that's the drift I was getting, which is why I put it in a secondary position here.
Well, if you accept his wording, I'll second it.
I want to know how the chair feels about that.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, Mr. Starbird. I think it boils down where this conversation has brought us. And I want to thank my colleagues because I appreciate both the support of this proposal, but also the excellent suggestions and the discussion about it. And I think that the point is excellent, that if we think this is good for this area, that it's something that at some point we might very well want to talk about, probably not at this agency, maybe at the council level, about how do we streamline our processes citywide to make it easier on businesses. And if I got one thing out of this conversation, it's that, and I completely agree with that. And it's wonderful to be able to go through the exercise like we did. It would have been something very difficult to do with a group of stakeholders from all over Glendale, but when you take a small area like this, I think you hear a lot of the same complaints, a lot of the same concerns that you would hear citywide. So that exercise, even though it was the particular area, it's something that I do think we'll be able to broaden to benefit businesses across Glendale. I look forward to that.
I just want to add what we're talking about. I was thinking, I don't know how vocal I was, before any of you up here were sitting on this council dais.
Were we born yet? Is the question?
You were born.
Okay.
I wasn't.
I don't know how far back we were.
Back in the late 1990s, I thought a creative corridor, their support for the movie industry with DreamWorks and Disney and hopefully Pixar coming in, and all the others, it made sense in an area down there that has not changed in my lifetime along San Fernando Road to create something new that would support the industries that are already there. So finally, we're starting to move that direction.
I was just going to say that I would be more than happy to move 6B1 as modified by the city manager.
I second that.
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Agency members: Draymond.
Yes.
Najarian.
Yes.
Quintero.
Yes.
Weaver.
Aye.
Chair Friedman.
Yes. Thank you. And what is next, please?
Agency member or staff comments?
I don't see any comments.
We adjourn.
We are adjourned.